he has a plan, she has a plan, and you get to pay for it regardless.
The best way to get someone motivated is to stand for something strongly, deeply, passionately.
Subscribe to Disenthrall.
Do as you're told.
Greetings, properties. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I am Patrick. We are still here at Float Fest, and today I have with me special guest Chuck, who is the CXO of Float. Welcome to the show.
Hey,
how are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, when I joined the company, a couple times the topic of property came up. Mm-hmm. And in our discussions, we had I don't know if we disagreed, but we definitely had different conceptions. And I think we both said, ooh, I think we want to dissect that or get into that sometime.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, I have this YouTube thing that might be good for that. And so here we are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Do you want to start with your conception of property, or you want me to lay mine out? And maybe we just kind of...
I think, so to be fair, like something that you had said kind of triggered me, and well, not triggered me, but it would piqued my interest.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, we should dive into more of that. So I kind of remember that conversation. And so what I would like is, if, in my ideal world, you replay that moment in that conversation as best as you can, whatever it was about private property, or you can just talk about your position on private property.
Okay.
And then I'll dive into the thing that we talked about off air for a minute.
Okay, so one of the first, I guess this is some inside float stuff too, right? So the topic came up when we were having our months-long in-depth debates about our house rules, and we were really working through the nitty-gritty of what should and shouldn't be allowed on a freedom-based platform.
Yeah, and even contextualizing it that way, almost turns me a little bit. The should and shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
It was. I'm trying to be careful with the construction of the framework.
Okay, fair. I don't know. I guess it's cool to talk about some of the internal discussions that float about this to contextualize. To
the degree that it's not proprietary and protected, I think that's fine because we were both involved, and it's me and you.
Yeah, so no platform is truly 100% free speech. No holes barred, post anything you want.
Right.
Every single platform, even the darkest, dirtiest stuff on the dark net, has rules for what you can't do.
And I expand that to the context beyond the internet. Right here we have some people, and you can say whatever you want, but it's not always going to be received well by those who are in your space or your community.
Yeah.
There's just these fundamental rules, and they're not nobody dictates these rules. It's just, hey, you learn how to talk, and that happens to be language, and there's rules in those language, and sometimes when you utter certain kinds of language, other people will respond in certain ways. Mm-hmm. Some forms of frequency language cause people to have internal emotional reactions, and that's just the social nature of communication, right? Mm-hmm. And so free speech, whenever that's your platform, whatever that is, however that gets out there, that's the platform and the medium and all that. And it's about that two-way communication. There's a sender and a receiver. Mm-hmm. And if it's not received well, then communication didn't happen. Mm-hmm. It's usually just noise.
I call language a lossy thought compression algorithm for that purpose.
A lossy thought compression algorithm. I can see that. Yeah.
Like JPEG.
Yeah, because
you get the gist, but it's not the same thing necessarily.
And now I'm having new language because I will sit and compile feelings and emotions and try to find the right words for to compress those emotions and feelings into. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I get it.
Yeah. So going back to the property, what came up was we were bantering back and forth and throwing out all kinds of ideas on where the line is. What do we not want to allow? Do we want to allow people to directly threaten other people?
Right.
No, not really. We don't want to platform threats of violence.
Yeah.
And then we start getting into, okay, well, that kind of goes to property.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to allow people to record themselves destroying someone's house.
Right.
Something like that. And so how do you codify that into a lossy thought compression algorithm that turns into a list of house rules that people are not going to beat you up for the next 100 years over, because no matter what you write into your house rules, people are going to interpret it. However, their brains decompress those bits
to their level of capability, right?
Yeah.
They might not have the dictionary. They might not have, or maybe they do. And maybe they can even understand it so well that they can try and game it. Like they might be motivated to game it. Who knows what's going to happen when people read those.
And so just to get super nerdy, because that's what I do all the time, compression works by looking for repeating patterns of zeros and ones. And it says, okay, here's a pack of, let's say 200 zeros and ones, and I've seen this order 50 times in this file.
Yeah.
So I'm going to only store that set of bits once, and I'm just going to hold a reference to it. And every time it's used again, I'm just going to insert the reference.
Right.
And it saves a lot of space. Mm-hmm. The word property is one of those references to a chunk of bits, to a piece of information that could mean many different things.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And there's many different conceptions of property. And so that's where this came up. We said, okay, well, it's pretty simple, right? It's clear language. No destruction of property or something like that was maybe a proposed house rule or something like that. Mm-hmm. And when I proposed it, I would have been thinking of my conception of property, which is super simple, something scarce and rivalrous.
As in there
reality.
Is dispute over there could be dispute over the ownership of the thing.
Something
is that what you mean by rivalrous?
Yeah, rivalrous qua property is a thing that can only be used by one person at a time.
Okay.
And so it's inherently conflict generating.
Yeah.
Or conflict apt.
Okay. Like a thought or a body or
no.
Well,
no.
That can only be used by one person at a time.
Why? You could share your thoughts, and then we can both have them.
Yeah, but the sharing of the thoughts involves a lossy compression algorithm that we talked about. That at that point, it's something different. It's not my property anymore.
So those thoughts are patterns imprinted on media, which would be the property.
Well, but as soon as you exit them from thought, they're not necessarily your property anymore. I mean, it depends on the contract. So.
Anyway, so that was my conception of property that I brought to that house rule. Yeah, and so when you apply that definition to that house rule, you get one, and you decompress it, you get one picture of behavior. And then you said, hey, I subscribe to this book that lays out 4 different types of property. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, and maybe you can walk us through that. But it's totally different. And I think 3 out of 4 of them are valid forms of property. And so, boom, now here we are. We have this cool discussion, and that's what I wanted to have you on for.
So Chaz Holloway, the End of the Political Class is the title of the book, and it's part of a 3-part series. I think he's finished the 2nd part. And the subtitle is, it's The Fall of the Political Class. In it, he talks about property and ownership and goes into some history
closer to your mouth.
Of how it's been defined in legal terms through history, both in American history and British history and common laws and tribal laws, and looks at all these kind of different things. And he basically comes back to some of these fundamental principles, and I can't elucidate all of them. But one of them that really kind of struck me at the time was it was kind of a revelation. Like you can't have property unless there's more than one person. If there's only one person, there's no need for the concept of property, right? So there's something fundamentally true or inherent or can be logically derived from. You need at least a community in order for the existence of property to even be a thing that you have a cognition for.
And that goes to why is property. Why property is because scarce resources are rivalrous, and if we have a predetermined or pre-agreed upon set of agreements on how to resolve disputes before they begin.
Right.
That's property.
So, and then what I think he does, if I remember correctly, in the book, is he goes through the kind of legal or moral arguments for why, basically, logically speaking, the body that you're born with, as a kind of a beginner example, is your property in that context, right? So it just kind of like it's fundamentally that way. And if you can logically stand that up and say that that's true, then it seems very likely, I think he carries this kind of through, whatever's inside of that is also probably your property, including your thoughts, your organs, your, all the things inside your cells, your DNA, your thoughts, and then what you do with all of that so your actions. That's one of the things that he says is property. The actions that you take with that body and those thoughts, right? So you're kind of combining your property to produce these actions. And then again, you're adding on, once you've done the body and the thoughts and the actions, you end up with things that might be produced or changed or modified or manipulated in the real world, this 3D space. And then that is presumably your property as well, given that you put effort into acquiring it. Now, then once you've done those actions, and you can have a lot of discussions about actions and the products of actions and who owns what property, right? You can sign away, you can contract away your actions, your effort to produce things that are part of the contract of those actions, right? So you've contracted away your time and your money, or your time and effort to build a thing. That's a part of the commission. Like, you can do that. But inherently, there is an agreement that must take place in order for that to be true. Anything less than that is slavery, presumably.
I try and be really annoyingly precise when we get into this stuff, because one little gray area early on can set you on a trajectory that takes you far past Saturn,
right?
In how it works out in reality and behavior. And so if we define property to include things like intellectual property,
and that's, I think, he gets a little sketchy with it. But finish your thought and then I'll respond.
Well, I mean, some of the things that you're listing, thoughts, that would be intellectual property, not because it's intellect, but because it's a pattern. Your thoughts, presumably, are a pattern of electrical signals that are occurring across your property, which would be your brain matter or your neurons.
I like to say they're a frequency, like all thoughts are a particular kind of frequencies or set of frequencies. I think the latest stuff says that we could be 11-dimensional. Our brain could be like an 11-dimensional quantum frequency, and that's how we think.
I don't know anything about that. So some of the other stuff you talked about kind of went into the intellectual property side of things. Like when it's a pattern imprinted on physical media, oftentimes people conflate the two and turn the pattern into the property instead of the pattern just being an arrangement of the property. And that's what I would view thoughts as. It's an arrangement. It's a pattern that's on top of or imprinted on, even momentarily, for flashes of seconds, onto the property of the brain, onto the actual matter, the property. What were the other ones? Actions. Actions is the use of property. It's not property in and of itself. It's like if I agree to work for somebody and we sign a contract, I'm agreeing to use my body property in an agreed upon way in exchange for something. The property is not the action or the work. The property is what I'm agreeing to use in an agreed way in exchange for something I want. Just to be like really precise about what is and isn't property. The work isn't property. I can't bottle it. I can't, it's not.
But you can destroy it.
It's not.
You can sabotage it, can't you? If you can destroy it, if you can be destructive with the thing, doesn't that make it property?
Only like metaphorically, like only in like metaphor can you do that, because it's not something that exists. It's descriptive of an action.
But are you suggesting that actions don't exist because they're temporal?
They don't exist. An action is like a movement or a transition or a conversion of something from one location, place, arrangement to another. It's a process, not a thing.
I guess I understand where you're going, and I see that you're having challenge nouning, I would say, a verb, actions, right? Making that into a noun seems kind of fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways. But I guess the way that I look at it, or the way I'm agreeing to look at it, is like, can I own it? Am I capable of owning it? Can I destroy it? Am I capable of destroying it? If that's true, it's probably property of some kind.
How can you destroy something that's like instantaneous, instant to instant temporal?
If it's like an action.
Yeah.
So it's
the most you could do is like stop doing it.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, the intent, you could change the intent of the action. You could, if you had an agreement to act in a certain way and you failed to act in that certain way, wouldn't that be a breach of contract?
Well, now we can get into contract theory, but I don't think breach of contract exists.
So I think, okay, really?
Which is a spicy thing.
Okay, so that is interesting, because I do tend to assume that people who believe that property exists also believe that contracts exist. But you're saying contracts don't exist?
Contracts are best thought of in their highest, most refined form. They are conditional property transfers.
Okay.
I say, I will give you this bar of gold on this date, and on the same date at the same time, you agree to give me, I don't know, whatever it is, $10,000, whatever it's worth now.
Okay. And
so that date comes, and if we have both signed the contract, and I have my bar of gold and you have your $10,000, then what happens is that the right to own those things swaps without us having done anything. And so from the point of that time that we agreed on that contract, the rightful ownership of those two pieces of property change. And so from that moment on...
At the beginning of the contract, you said?
Let's say... maybe I made it more messy by putting a date on it.
Yeah, sure.
Let's just say, like, right now, here's a piece of paper, here's my bar of gold, there's your $10,000, sign this, and it just says, boom, I'm selling you a bar of gold for that money right now.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Forget the time element.
Sure.
If we both sign it, then the moment we've signed it, the rightful ownership, and ownership I would define as the right to exclude others from the use of a thing.
Okay.
That's the best definition I've ever heard for ownership.
Okay. I would call that control.
Okay. So the moment we both sign that paper, then we both have the right to exclude the other person. I have the right to exclude you from that $10,000, and you have the right to exclude me from the use of that bar of gold.
Okay.
And if I remain in possession of it and refuse to give it to you, I haven't breached the contract. I have de facto stolen your gold. I have precluded you from your rightful ownership of that gold.
So one interesting thing about that is I'm reminded of Jordan Peterson's perspective on rights, and it aligns with this perspective of property that I speak of, but I haven't really tested Jordan's perspectives enough to be sure that he's fully in alignment.
I'm not familiar. What is it?
Basically, any rights that exist, any rights that anybody believes exist, are somebody else's responsibility. That's the fundamental posit as a behavioral psychologist. So if there is rightful ownership, there is also responsibility associated with that transfer, in this case, of ownership, right? There is an equivalent amount of responsibility on somebody else's part in order for you to have that, to execute that right.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's based on, fundamentally, and I don't know if this agrees with Jordan Peterson or not, and it kind of sounds like it does, rights are mutual reciprocal agreements between people. So
right.
Like if we both agree on what property is and what ownership is, and we both sign that contract based on top of that mutual pre-existing understanding of property rights.
Okay. So then I was going to ask as a follow-up question, what's the difference then between an agreement and a contract? Because you described a contract, but you're also saying that contract didn't exist, and I didn't hear that connection of how that contract didn't exist.
The contract would just be like an evidenced agreement. Like, so if there's a dispute and I don't give you the bar of gold and you want to go to your dispute resolution company to come get the bar of gold from me, you would be able to hand them evidence that we had an agreement. That's what a contract is. It would just be evidence of that agreement.
Okay, so when you say contracts don't exist, what do you mean?
I said breach of contract.
Breach of contract doesn't exist. Okay.
The act of breach of contract should not be thought of as the crime. The crime is after the rightful ownership changes. Well, it's theft. That's already a crime in and of itself. We don't need to call that breach of contract. It's just theft. You have the rightful ownership of this bar of gold now.
Okay. Now you're starting to support this action being property idea, because you can contract for services, right? You can make an agreement to offer services.
Yes.
And you can fail to deliver services. You can do it intentionally, and you can do it unintentionally.
True.
You can fail to transfer the property. You can fail to deliver the agreement.
True.
The property engaged specifically agreed upon.
But we're reifying something that isn't property into property needlessly.
Well, this is one of the fundamentals. If you don't agree that actions can be property, and are not willing to see the evidence of how actions can be property, then the argument of what is property kind of breaks down.
Well, so again, when I say my definition of property is scarce and rivalrous resources.
Yeah, which actions can be.
How? They don't exist. They're not.
What makes it not
scarce
exist?
Qua tangible. They're not rivalrous qua, uniquely possessible.
I think they are. It depends. It depends on the actions. It depends. Do you want a professional cake baked? Right.
That would be the person using their body that they own and their
a collection
flower
of
that they
actions
own.
And a collection of actions, because you can't do it without the actions.
Well, owning something includes manipulating it if you want, and so that doesn't turn the action of manipulating your property into a property in and of itself.
Well, it depends on how you define property. And it's just a basic question. Can you own your actions or not? And you're saying they cannot be owned.
Because it's not tangible. It's not scarce and rivalrous.
It's
you using your property.
Are you saying, so property must exist in 3D physical space? Is that basically what you're saying?
I'm saying it doesn't make sense because it's recursive. It's using your property is property, and so if using my property creates a new form of property in the moment,
like an electric generator generates wattage, right? People charge, utility companies charge, right? They have the capital and they have the wattage that travels through the wire, right? They're leveraging an action of their property to produce.
I'm not disagreeing that you can't sell labor. I'm just saying what you're doing is not transferring title of ownership of labor to the other person. What you're doing is agreeing to use your property in a certain way, based on terms of your agreement.
Okay,
that's all I'm saying.
I think if we can't make the leap that abstract non-physical things can be owned, then
there's a lot of things that you can do with, and I'm begging the question when I say real property, so let me say my conception of property, I guess. There's a lot of things that you can do with my conception of property that you couldn't do with those conceptions of property. Transfer them, sell them.
But you do.
No. If I sell you my labor, can you then sell it to somebody else?
Well, there's some things that cannot be permanently transferred, like your body, for instance, right?
Well, my body's not what we're talking about. We're talking about my labor, which is somehow different. Ephemeral.
Well,
ephemeral?
Ephemeral? Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. It may be actions are ephemeral, but they are generated by bodies, right? I mean, for the most part, I don't know any other actions. I mean, there are machines that can generate action, So but the premise, the basic idea is that these are all forms of property, and they are differentiated forms of property intentionally. That's it. What the point of this whole premise is, this is it. These are all the forms of property that exist. And if you can include actions, and you can include the products of actions, right? I mean, actions are labor, right? In this context, right? And if we can't get to the place where that is property, then again, that the whole argument breaks down. And
yeah, so, I guess my argument is that that is superfluous in terms of a form of property. Like that, you don't get anything extra by adding that to the matrix of.
Well,
what
I think
is
you
property.
do. You get a way of looking at how contracts can be written, how services can be rendered. You can analyze situations of work, of labor, and kind of break down and isolate where the focus of the contract might be. You know, is it with the results of the output, that would be the product itself, because that might be a set of metrics, or is it with the effort? Do they pay per hour, or do they pay per widget produced, right? And there's a distinction there, and that can indicate what somebody's valuing in terms of the property, and that can help people to evaluate what the real property of a business or an organization or an effort is.
I mean, I hear you and I understand what you said, but I don't see how you've added anything to the system of property by adding labor as a form of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's labor in the macro sense. It's literally actions. It's the action, each individual action you take, because it takes a conscious effort, the thought, the product of the thought to make an action occur. Also the body, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of existing property to make new property that did not exist before. And I think that's the thing, and that's what makes it scarce, because it didn't exist before. That particular movement, that particular action, that particular painting, the way that those brushstrokes move, that particular driving, that particular whatever.
How could I steal action?
You can manipulate the person.
That sounds like
you can.
That sounds like sales and marketing.
Well, you can steal action by causing people to live or work in a way where their effort goes to a place that they don't know. Where they think they're doing one thing and their effort actually produces another thing.
How is that stealing?
It's
what's your definition of theft?
So I don't have a solid definition, but theft of any of that property, I would say would be theft. So you can steal thoughts in this case. Let's say,
I mean, surely you can see how this kind of seems ephemeral. Like, it just seems like we're talking about non-tangible stuff.
Yeah, no, it is. And this is a lot of me. Like, Chaz doesn't talk about this stuff in his book. Like, you're getting into, like, frequencies of consciousness and psychic and capability and remote reading and, reading the waves of the body. Real? I think some things are real. I think, like, for instance, we know that you can read a heartbeat and detect the range of emotions that a person might be feeling based on their heartbeat.
That seems plausible.
Right?
Yeah.
And by the frequency of their particular lub-dub, you can read that frequency and you can do that. And they actually have devices, products out there that will do that with your heart and play music based on what the system thinks that you should play. So that's like real, right? So if that's sold, hey, he's feeling angry right now, right? Wouldn't you consider that theft? That's an emotion that you're feeling that you expected perhaps to be private property. Wouldn't you expect your feelings to be personal and within you?
No.
Really? You expect all of your emotions and thoughts to be broadcast to everybody around you?
Well, that's a goalpost move a little bit, isn't it?
That's not, though. I'm just saying that's the technological direction that all these AI chip inserting people want to go. The transhumanist movement is exactly that.
It would be like what's an analogy? So let's say there's a photographer over that berm over there, and he's got a great lens on it, and he takes a picture of my face and runs it through some AI that can determine my emotions, which right now is, I'm having a blast, by the way. So,
good.
Yeah, I hope you are too. And so he hasn't stolen anything from me. I have nothing less than I had the moment before he discovered his AI told him what I was feeling.
Well, yeah, but he okay, so how
this is intellectual property all over again. Like we're right back there.
I'm suggesting, see, you're basing this on the premise that thoughts are not property, right? He hasn't stolen anything because thoughts are not property.
I guess I need it goes back to so it goes back to why is property. The purpose of property is agreements between people to reduce conflict and rivalrousness over resources.
I wouldn't agree with that. Okay, yeah, I wanted you to come back with that.
So if that's the purpose of property, then any additions to those rules need to serve that goal. Now, if you think there's a different reason that property exists,
well,
then that's totally valid. I mean, you might have a totally valid your own thing.
I think
right?
property is an emergent system of social creatures.
Yeah.
It's just an emergent system. So it's not, I don't think it like exists for any necessarily purpose. I think it's just something that arises out of a pool of socially conscious, socially connected creatures.
I don't think it exists at all. I think it's a mutual agreement.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But exists. Okay, so we have to come back to this word exists, right? In this case,
I just wanted to clarify. Sorry.
The existence of a thing. Property only exists in the mind. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Correct.
So, when we're talking about the mental space,
it's a concept.
It itself, property, is a concept.
Yes.
So you can't make the thing that is a concept based on a thing that is in 3D reality, because it is by its nature a concept.
It is arbitrarily agreed on, chosen.
Yeah. And it's acknowledged and recognized.
Much like morality.
Well, it kind of does exist in nature to a degree. Again, the social degree of the creature, squirrels they bury 80%. They forget about 80% of the things that they bury, but the ones that they bury, they protect, right? And other squirrel, there is a protection layer. They will draw a boundary around their stuff, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's manifestations
but they don't respect other people's property. Like if in my backyard, I put a nut on the table in my backyard. That nut is my property. The table's my property. The backyard is my property. The house is my property.
Yeah, but you're not sharing.
And that's not going to stop the squirrel from stealing it.
The squirrel's not in the same community.
The squirrel can't even comprehend the concept of property. He's not a property. He's like a ghost.
But that doesn't mean that
property.
It doesn't exist for them. It kind of does exist, even though they can't have the concept of it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Maybe some sort of like genetic, instinctual, defensive
it's a low degree. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very low degree of concept of property, but they do have it. Like, it manifests on some level for them, right? They protect their stuff. They protect their food. They protect their bodies. You know,
that's only like half of property, though. I guess is my point. Like half of property is defending your own stuff, believing you have the right to defend your own stuff.
See, that's the thing.
The other half of property is reciprocating that with other people.
And this is the thing that makes humans more evolved, is at a conscious level, is we have extended the definition of property beyond our own bodies and our own thoughts. Mm-hmm. And that's what separates us from the rest, a lot of other creatures. You know, we have tools, and we will say, that's mine. Communication in a community, and the community must acknowledge that's mine as, oh, that's his property, right? That specific frequency phrase now is a claim made in the mental abstract realm over a 3D object within the community.
Yes.
Right?
Based on agreed upon rules. Yes.
And that's when the thing becomes property, but not before that inherently, because we conceive it that way. But that doesn't mean that, again, that the squirrel doesn't manifest the protection of property. Like, it exists on some level, even though they might not be able to conceive of it.
They don't manifest the reciprocation of that, which is what property really is. Like, because you
need community and communication in order to do that. And we don't share community with squirrels, so they don't respect our stuff, and we don't respect their stuff necessarily.
It's not that
their property.
Like, if we could communicate with squirrels on that level, then we would start reciprocating property with squirrels.
We would be sharing community, right?
But they don't conceptualize at that level. They're much more primitive.
We can only assume. Yes, well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, Can we? Yeah, we can agree there. Okay. Squirrels can't conceptualize property.
Yeah,
and therefore, and this gets to my conception of morals. What are rights and who gets them? Is as reciprocal mutual agreements. If you have an entity that cannot participate with you in a reciprocal rights agreement, then there's no onus on you to respect that thing's rights that it doesn't even understand or know that it has, or reciprocate with you. And that's why
I think that depends on the person. I think that depends on their perception of morality and whether or not a creature being that does not respect their property still can be respected of their property. I think that
would be altruism. I'm not saying you can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's no onus. You're not you're not breaching your community agreement.
Presumably not. Yeah.
By killing the squirrel and eating it, for example. Right.
Yeah.
Because okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So where are we at now?
So we still haven't resolved the possibility. I want to try to convince you that actions can be property.
Okay.
And yet I don't think I don't know if it's a good test that whether or not something can be stolen that makes it property, because as we said, some of these things I think are ephemeral, and I'm testing these ideas. Like fair,
yeah, and I'm open to having my mind changed too. That's why I do this channel. So, if property is about reducing conflict, do we agree there? That's the reason we have property.
No,
these reciprocal agreements.
As I said, no. It's an emergent property. Like, it's an emergent thing. It emerges from a set of rules and conditions. I think property arises out of that. So I don't think property necessarily exists. I think property happens to exist because we happen to be social creatures who live in environments where there is scarcity and things are shared.
Well, I guess I agree that basic behaviors manifest property to a limited degree in nature, but as higher conceptualizing beings, we're able to choose to disregard those property agreements or completely create brand new ones. We could treat, I don't know, what's an example of not property? I'm trying not to. I would have normally said thoughts and actions. So I'm trying not to beg the question. But we could right now between us make up some completely new, radically different property agreement between us, and we could reciprocate that.
Yes.
And that's not something that was manifested out of nature, and yet we as higher thinking beings can choose which agreement we reciprocate.
Yes.
And so to me that defeats this linkage to what manifests in nature. It's not, we're higher thinking beings. So if we follow a property agreement, it's because we chose to, not because it's programmed into us and we have no choice because it's manifesting.
I just think we're able to take the existing 3D property that is easy to recognize. I think we're able to take those concepts that are in nature into the mental realm. I think that's just what you're doing in those cases. When you make an agreement over thoughts, over an exchange of thoughts, or an exchange of effort for thoughts, or thoughts for thoughts, or effort for effort, or product for effort, that agreement, once you conceive of that agreement, you've made a concept of property and bound it to a commitment of a set of actions in the agreement.
Okay, so let's distinction without a difference check test this. So if a thought is a piece of property, there's all sorts of things you can't do with that type of property that you can do with the traditional. Is that a fair way of classifying
3D physical kind of property? Sure, yeah.
Traditional property.
Yeah. You have ephemeral and physical property, let's say.
I can't hoard thoughts. I can't transfer thoughts verbatim yet.
Right.
Elon.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, we may.
Yeah, maybe.
The possibility may exist. See, and that's the thing I kind of acknowledge.
Even then, that would be a pattern like music, and I would argue against that being a form of property, right?
You recorded my brain?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I lost where I was going.
I'm sorry.
No, it was funny. I got off thinking about Elon. That came out wrong phrasing.
So you were backing into something, and I cut you off. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I forgot what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well.
Oh, I was trying to distinction without a difference test.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, if let's do labor because it might be simpler than thoughts, right? So like if labor is a valid form of property and we treat it as such, there's things you can't do with labor that you can do with traditional property. Is there anything that we can't do, or is there any rivalrousness that comes out of not being able to treat labor as property that isn't already pre-resolved by traditional property?
Not being able, does
that make sense?
Is there anything we can't do by not being able to treat labor as property like what do we gain by treating labor as property? Is this you're coming?
Yeah, so I worded it terribly. That's my fault. So like when I was talking about labor to me is the usage of your property in an agreed upon way. That gets us all of the dispute resolution that you would need over labor contracts without labor being property that I can imagine. Maybe you can tell me something I'm missing. I guess that's my question. Is there anything that, that I'm missing? Is there any rivalrousness out there that my system of property doesn't resolve that treating labor as property does?
Yeah, the distribution of skill.
What do you mean?
The distribution of skill. It's not an even distribution. You can't count on one person's actions, labor, being the same as another person's actions or labor. There's more value in some people's labor than others. So that property, the action, like you can't just treat labor equivalently across all humans, and because that's
I don't believe I am.
Well, but that's the thing that makes it a scarce resource. See, it fits the definition of property in that case. It's a scarce, rivalrous resource because skills are unevenly distributed. Labor, work, effort, actions are unevenly distributed.
So aren't you then advocating that a person's skill level is the property?
No, it's the action. Just because they happen to do it in a particular way, that makes it valuable. That makes it scarce. That's what I'm saying.
I don't see how that gets you anything. Like I don't see how it gets you anything.
Well,
new
no,
from
I'm trying to align it with your definition of property.
Okay.
By making it a scarce, rivalrous resource, because you have effort, you have labor, but it's not all the same.
It's not rivalrous because only one person can ever use that labor, and only in that specific moment, and then it's gone.
That's not true. That's not true.
Ephemeral.
That's not true. That's not true.
Okay.
Because you can contract for a person's labor, and then many people get the benefit of those actions, like a superstar basketball player.
But they don't get the labor.
They are getting who's not getting the labor? Everybody's getting the labor.
The labor doesn't exist. It's not like when I buy an iPod, I get the iPod and a little packet of labor with it. Like
no, you have to agree to the contract
to
conduct the actions. Your property.
We're like reifying concepts.
No. This is just coming back to the property of actions, in this case, it is tied to agreement, and it's demonstrative that you can transfer actions as property, because I can contract those actions, those rare and rivalrous skills, to do a particular thing at a particular time in a particular way. And I can choose not to. I can destroy that. I can just say no. And I can opt out, and then I will have broken an agreement in the colloquial sense.
I just really feel like we're messing with the lossiness in language to make the case for this. Like
for actions being property?
Yeah. It's
I think I feel like you're getting hung up on the temporal nature of actions. Like it seems like that like property for you needs to be something that sits and is stable and does not move.
I mean, can I hoard it? Can I sell it?
I don't think that's the good definition of property. Like,
well, those are all the things that come out of. Those are all the rivalrous attributes of property.
Oh, I see. Okay, so
like,
if you can't, but that's not entirely true. You don't think that there's rivalry in having a certain level of skill in certain areas, being a great writer, being a great basketball player, being a great whatever?
No, explicitly not. And maybe
you don't think that's rivalrous?
Maybe this resolves it, right? Because if you're a badass basketball player, that in no way diminishes my ability to become a badass basketball player too. We can both use the badass basketball playerness at the same time.
Well, that may be true, but with two badass basketball players, you're having just a bigger market, right? There's just more of you in the market, which might cut your price in half. If your skill level is exactly the same as my skill level, then they can get the LeBron Jr. and instead of the LeBron James,
Yeah, but the value of the labor is not what we're debating. We're debating if the labor is property.
But I'm saying it reduces the scarcity.
The rivalrousness of the labor isn't reduced when multiple people learn the skill. Well,
that's what I'm saying. No, it is. That I think the reduction in value makes it rivalrous, don't you? Like if you have multiple people who reduce the value of the thing by basically competing at the same level, having the same skill level, well, you've just commoditized the skill now. Now you're just doing something that you just scale that out. Now everybody can swing a hammer. Right? You just scale that out to the nth degree. Okay, now that's not valuable anymore because it's not special. I can get anybody to do that. So I'm just saying, the one guy, it does diminish. What I'm saying is, in a market, it does diminish. In a community, it does diminish. Because it influences the scarcity of the skill.
I really think we're distinction without a difference. I think we're compatible. I don't think. I could say the same thing in terms of, this guy, and by this guy, I'm referring to this guy's body with brains, with patterns that know how to do basketball playing well. I want to hire him over that guy because his property will serve my needs better if I can convince him to use his property in an agreed upon way. I think we're saying the same thing different ways. Maybe that I'm not trying to dodge you. I'm just trying to
in this
make
case,
sense
yeah.
of the
I mean,
language.
So. Are you saying that I'm saying that there's no semantic difference between me saying that that property or its actions and labor doesn't even need to be counted because we can't distinguish why actions need to be counted? Is that why?
That was my last question to you. Was like, what do I get? What do I get? Not.
I'd have to go back to the book because he has a whole chapter on why actions are property.
Fair.
Yeah,
I mean that's fair. Yeah. I was just asking, like, what's the distinction?
Yeah,
is there a difference here?
There is, and he kind of breaks it down. He goes through the outer to the inner, basically from the physical 3D world of the products of labor, and then that's where we've been focusing most of our history, and kind of explains all that, and then backs into what about labor itself, and talks about communism and socialism and owning labor and who owns labor and indentured servitude and slavery and all this degrees, we would say, of the ownership of labor. Basically,
when you start getting into ownership of things that are intangible, you get communism, you get communistic property norms.
Right. And that's why you have to begin with, these are the four properties, not only that exist,
well,
but
actions are labors. Labor theory of value is this lines up pretty well with it, right?
In a way, but it doesn't end there, and that's the problem. See, with the communists, they stop there. They forget about, hey, there's a fucking will, there's a thought, there's an intent behind the action, and they just cut that out entirely. And that's where Chaz Holloway basically picks up and says, okay, here's why, and this is the scientific reason, and these are the latest science, and this is why we believe that labor is or effort or actions are an ownable thing that involve basically thought. First they involve the body. You can't take action without a body. That's kind of one of the presumptions, and these are the four properties essentially that we own inherently, and everything that exists. That's the premise of the book. You start here, and from these definitions of property, you decide how to write your contracts, your blockchain contracts, and this is kind of the intent of his book. He's trying to get blockchain folks to see this and use this model so that there can be a open source governance, basically, is what he wants to get to, of property in an equitable way where it's all kind of recognized in the same way.
So I'd like to bookend this and maybe pick it up later and then move on to a couple other things if you have time. Are you out? Or?
I mean, we only have that meeting that we have that's
okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think I was able to convince you, and I don't feel convinced, but I also know that I don't think I did a good enough job, and I want to do my research and think about it more.
Right on.
So thank you for making me think new thoughts. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
It gets rare sometimes to find people that can really challenge you, so I appreciate it.
Thank you
cool. for stepping up and being
I'm glad for that. Yeah, cool.
It's good. to parlay into, if you want, to talking more about this social media freedom of speech idea.
Oh yeah, okay.
I don't think anybody has. So few people run social media platforms that they're never in the position of defining where the line is.
And the line, what? The line of content, the line of community, the line of
content,
whatever.
What you will allow, what you will host, and what you won't.
Yeah.
And my first taste of this was when, so a bunch of my viewers were banned from our Discord server, and so this was years ago. I started a Matrix server.
Yeah.
And it's hosted on my hardware, and subject to very few terms of services. And what that left me in a state of was complete freedom of speech. It was totally up to me. Any user could create an account on my Matrix server and post whatever they wanted. And suddenly, for the first time, I was a little terrified because there's a lot of terrible stuff out there.
Sure.
Right?
And you might have had to do a lot of moderation to just keep it the way you wanted it or whatever.
We all get lazy.
Yeah.
Like when we use Facebook, we don't have to think about what we post. We have a list of rules that have been predetermined for us.
Sure.
But when we host our own stuff, suddenly we're responsible for making the decision. I'm going to put money on this. I'm going to keep the lights on. I'm going to work every day to keep the lights on and to develop this product and maintain this server in the case of Matrix.
Yeah.
Am I willing to do that for the terriblest of terrible things on the internet? No,
right.
Obviously, right? So I just, that was a perspective that I think very few people get. And so they go around demanding free speech platforms, but they don't really think ever of the other side of that, of the costs,
Who's
what you're
paying
asking
for
people
the
to do.
speech?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So it is interesting being on the server side as an experienced professional and like wanting to empathize with the end users and like wanting to advocate for what they want and being, understanding that, but also looking at the business and what the business needs and, what the technology is capable of. It gets into this really like competitive swarm in my head. I go around and around and around and I'm like, okay, yeah, but the users, okay, yeah, but the business, okay, yeah, but the technology, and okay, yeah, but the users, and that's where I go into this cycle. But where I've landed with this kind of particular thing is I think that the users have some responsibility to do some level of blocking, policing, like some of it's on them. Like I think it's appropriate for you to just change the channel, shut off the porn, do the things, as long as we can give you the controls.
That's it.
To kind of turn it off. Like that's where I think it starts.
Yeah.
You like, and again, this is because of property. Honestly, your responsibility is to control your thoughts. Like if you're going to look at this media, first and foremost, that's your choice. You opted in to putting those pixels on your screen, right? So that's where it begins. And if something happens to flash up, hey, you can't first blame us. You first have to blame yourself because you presented yourself with this content. That there may have been uninformed risk. There may have been informed risk, but that's kind of where I start. Then I go to the business and I look at, okay, what, given that, there's going to be some costs involved to giving the end users those levels of basic controls. But what I think the business needs to get out of that is the users need to feel comfortable. If the business is dependent on the users being happy, which I kind of presume, right? I think it's just worth stating as a fundamental principle, or even delighted, luckily. You want them to feel safe at a baseline, safe and in as much control as they can, and then once they feel safe and in as much control, they're never confused, they're never bothered, they're then empowered or delighted is really the next thing, and that's where I think we can do a lot as a business, and there's a lot of business opportunity to add special filters and things like that, but Facebook would never go there and would never capitalize on that. So I think I see that for us as Float as a competitive advantage, because I think we can go into that business space and start serving users in a particular way that they will pay for. That's going to give them more control over their information and data. I just see that as a strategic option, and maybe that's inside baseball. But
well said. I mean, well said. You said it in the beginning where you're like, give them control over what they see. If Facebook, and this was something I thought about before I joined Float. I was trying to design my own decentralized social network before I discovered Float, and it's like, oh, let's do this. Let me join them.
Yeah.
Was if Facebook had only spent as much time and money in designing ways to hand users control over what they see instead of trying to regulate and control and detect what they're seeing, they would have a plethora of tools.
Right.
You could have an entire control panel. I want to see more of this type of stuff,
right?
Less of
exactly.
that, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to do it, like, why don't we invest in giving the users control over what they see rather than trying to, control it for them, be their nanny.
And this is a lot of thinking. Like this is not just a flippant thought. Like I think about this all the time, and I keep coming back to this. Even when I test out ideas, I get a lot of influence. Like, you guys should do this, and you guys should do that, and like my business is doing this, and my business is doing. Like, I hear all these kinds of, other avenues that we could go, and some of them are technological solutions and some of them are business solutions, but I keep coming back to, no, if we're really going to be in alignment with this epic calling, we just need to give them the controls. We don't want to make decisions for them. We want to present them with the decisions that we don't want to make for them, basically, as a principle. Like, here's the decision, go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also important. I again, like, there is a line. There is the line. First, there's the law, because we have guns pointed at us,
and that's unfortunate in my opinion. Like, I hate regulation. I feel like regulation just gets in the way with all of this.
Yeah, I mean, the quintessential example of that is intellectual property. Like, at some point, sometime, we're going to get a DMCA takedown request, and there's guns pointed at us if we don't honor that.
Right.
I mean, company-ending guns pointed at us.
And we need to be in a position where we're like, we don't know what that is. Like, we can't touch it. It's out there. It's
that would
encrypted.
Be nice.
It's backed with a key. How do you know?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Prove it.
Yeah.
Yeah, prove it. Chuck, we got to do this again.
Yeah.
It was fun. Thank you very much. All right.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments down below where I went wrong. Maybe tell me what I should have been saying to convince him, or what I'm missing to convince me. Thanks, everybody, for participating and thinking. We need more of it. Appreciate y'all.